In our next session, Projility's Rob Hirschmann will be sharing insight on project and portfolio management technology trends. Rob Hirschmann is a partner at Projility, and he has over 20 years of experience leading enterprise project and portfolio management strategies and initiatives for large organizations. He has a deep background in project and portfolio management, business process automation, and enterprise collaboration. Rob leads Projility's business development and client relationship organization, working closely with the firm's delivery team to drive real business outcomes and results for clients. Prior to Projility, Rob worked for Microsoft as a solutions specialist for their PPM tools, and with James Martin and Company, a global consultancy focused on business process reengineering. Rob has been a Microsoft project user since 1994. Today, Rob will be presenting on trends in the project and portfolio management tool space. So Rob, if you could please share your screen.
Got it up now. Can you hear me, Sarah?
All yours. Yep, we can hear you just fine. Okay, it's all you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks everybody for joining. Great presentations, and Justin. Super feedback, and really great to hear how organizations are being successful with project management solutions. We're going to switch the focus a little bit now to talk a little bit about the project management tools space. So I'm going to go through and give you a bit of an understanding in terms of what the tools do and what they're designed to do. Talk a little bit about how some of the trends in the market are changing that, and what some of those changes are and the impact that's going to have on organizations that are either thinking about moving to centralized project management tools or already using them. We get a lot of questions on a day-to-day basis. Hey, there's new tools, new platforms. How does that play in with traditional project management tools? How does it tie in with our Agile tools, our service management tools? There's just a lot of flux in the market. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're also going to focus a little bit about some of the changes that COVID has driven really throughout not only our society, but with specific to these tools and the impact that's changed and the results we're seeing from that as it relates to the tools you choose and use. We'll then move forward and talk a little bit about what the Microsoft platform options are, how Microsoft is shifting as the market is shifting, what the different approaches are, what the components are, what the platform looks like, and how it's looking going forward to give you a bit of a view into the future. And also towards the end, we'll wrap up a little bit about, how do I get ready for this? How do I start to act on this before it hits me? Because a lot of these changes are happening on a day-to-day and a real-time basis where CIOs and PMOs are being asked for different types of tools and being prepared for that. In fact, staying ahead of that curve is a big part of enterprises really preparing to deliver to the internal, external customers they have. So that's really what we're going to be focused on for the next 30 minutes. Let's start out by talking a little bit about traditional project management tools and what they provide. And if you really think about it, there's 6 or 7 different core functions that a project management tool is designed to deliver on. The first of those, and it may seem fairly obvious, is the ability to manage project schedules. And that's the ability for a project manager to build out a work breakdown structure, build out a formal schedule based off the statement of work he or she has been given, and then manage that schedule on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis and track the progress, the deltas, and address challenges as it relates to scope, schedule, and budget, manage the triple constraint through a schedule. So that's the first thing a traditional project management tool does. The second thing a traditional project management tool does, it assists with managing project resources. And those resources could be people that are assigned to different projects. They could be equipment that we're using on different projects, things like hardware and software. It could be roles to do forecasting of different resources, or if we don't know who's going to work on a task, we may want to assign different roles and be able to aggregate or roll that information up. And finally, it's things like capital and budget and costs related to different projects. So resources can mean many things, but a traditional project management tool does assist with the planning, tracking, management of resources. And as Ange mentioned in her presentation, resource management is a journey, right? It is a long-term approach you take because there's a lot of organizational change required to do that, but also a lot of business value that comes from that. Traditional project management tools also assist in the collection of time. They are time tracking systems that allow not only for the capture of time, but also forward forecasting to say, a resource has worked on this task for 40 hours, but they need another 20 hours, which means I'm going to finish in another 4 or 5 days. So it not only helps you with a snapshot of backwards, like a traditional timesheet, but also a look forwards so that a project manager can be a lot more proactive. And that's really the value of time in a project management system. It's not just for billing purposes, it's actually also for forecasting purposes. So you can determine, are you on time? Are you going to be on budget? Do you need to make any changes to the scope, schedule, budget, your triple constraint, based off the time that's coming in from your team members? It's the third thing a traditional project management tool does. The fourth thing it does, and you heard it both from Ange and Justin, it reports. It allows for different types of reporting on different types of information on your projects and schedules, on your resources and their work, as well as the time that's coming in on those different components. And Justin showed you some really great reports on issues. He showed you some reports on risks and showed a bit of a status report that goes out to senior management. So that's really one of the core reasons people look at traditional project management tools, is to get more consistent managed reporting on the data they have in their system. Project management tools traditionally also help you organize and standardize on project artifacts. Those would be documents. They could be requirements documents, design documents, sprint documents. Any kind of an artifact you would be tracking and managing on a project is also traditionally stored in a traditional project management tool, and then you can access it, search on it, so it's all in one place. You're not looking on SharePoint sites, in emails, in OneDrive. It's all centrally managed in one place, so the data and the artifacts for projects are all together. Traditional project management tools also assist with, it may seem obvious, managing the portfolio of projects and initiatives you may have going on. And there's a tactical element to that, the active projects. There's a strategic element to it, the projects we think we're going to do. And then even a more strategic execution level, we're thinking long-term about initiatives and portfolios. I want to manage that level as well as things like return on investment. So a traditional project management tool does assist with the management of the overall portfolio. And the final thing a traditional project management tool does, it assists with process automation. You may have different business processes such as change management or scope management or schedule management in this case, or resource management. These tools are really designed to assist with the process automation. So this is how traditional project management tools are designed. The reality of what's going on in the marketplace and what's happened over the last couple of years is the requirements for traditional project management tools have changed, and they've changed for many, many reasons. And next, we're going to explain to you, to really understand what these changes are, it's useful to look backwards and really identify these trends. And that'll help us look forwards and say, okay, based off the history, here's where we believe things are headed. So what we can do next is actually start looking forward at some of those trends. Let's start with a little bit of the history. So if we look back at a timeline, traditional project management tools really started in the 1960s and 70s out of the US Navy. And the Navy was looking to actually visualize the build out of different large ships that they were building. So they came up with concepts such as PERT and Gantt, visualizations of different tasks and activities in a centralized project schedule. In the late 1980s and early 90s, these tools became centralized scheduling systems. They moved off of mainframes and moved on to PCs, as PCs were launched in the late 80s, early 90s, and became more Windows-based in the mid to late 90s. So in the 90s, we had centralized scheduling systems where we can track and manage our schedules all in one place. That was really the first move in the history. The late 90s to early 2000s, we really moved to a couple of different changes in the marketplace. The first of those was enterprise project scheduling and the ability to standardize on those schedules, not just keep them all in one place, but have standard metrics, standard KPIs, and be able to store, track, and manage all those schedules all in one repository. That was a big move at the time. We also started seeing the move to actually integrating collaboration. And as tool vendors started to realize that it wasn't just about the schedule, there were also other artifacts and processes that needed to be supported in these tools. So basic collaboration was introduced really in the mid to late 90s. We also started to see, the third bullet down, as the first enterprise database-driven project management systems enter the market. Tools like Primavera came in, mainly in construction and engineering. Artemis entered the market in the late 80s and early 90s for really viewing information across projects and portfolios and doing cost management. A tool called Niku came out in the mid 90s as a web-based project management tool that was eventually purchased by and became Clarity, which was purchased by CA. PlanView was first launched in the 1990s, as was Microsoft Project Central, which was Microsoft's first entry in the market in 1999, and that became Project Server in 2001 and 2002. So we started to see these systems driven by databases, which was really important because that allowed you to access all of your data and start to do reporting, which was a key requirement. We also in the late 90s started to see the initiation of a move to what we call portfolio management at the time. And that may seem very obvious to most folks, but in the late 90s, that was a new concept. And these concepts really came out of Wall Street and New York, where organizations in the software business started to take those concepts of managing portfolios of stocks and bonds, turning that over into a way to manage projects and manage initiatives in a way where you could do investment management around those. Think of it as the front end part of the funnel in making decisions. And those enterprise-driven project management tools really didn't have the capability at the time. So really the first tools to hit that market were Pacific Edge, which came out in the mid to late 90s as a pure web-based tool. ProSite came out, mainly focused on the government, the ability to do what they call capital planning and investment control. UMT released a tool called Portfolio Manager at the time, which was really designed, again, to do portfolio management across your initiatives, projects, and strategies. So that was really what happened in the late 90s. Between 2000 and 2010, we started to see really the mainstreaming of a lot of this. We moved from enterprise scheduling and collaboration to really a formalized concept that was put out there by a lot of the analysts, and that was called Enterprise Project Management, or EPM. So a lot of folks that remember this period, EPM was kind of the big buzz, and it really brought together the scheduling, the collaboration in a database-driven system, and a way to really bring all that together. Again, in the early 2000s, we started to see the emergence of pure web-based technologies. So this is the first launch of SharePoint, came out in SharePoint 2001, 2003, and 2007. So a lot of these platforms started to think about, how do I integrate in a collaborative web portal for my projects along with my project management information? And that integrated collaboration technology move really happened around then. We also started to see the second wave of that portfolio management, the strategic concept behind these tools. This started to mature. Tools started to mainstream a little more. They were available on modern platforms. They started to get easier to use. They started to become more Microsoft in terms of the nature of it. And finally, that EPM really as a mainstream concept out there really became very, very big. It became a core tool set that large enterprises started to say, hey, this is probably something we need. This isn't a fringe tool anymore just for the schedulers and the Gantt chart geeks, as I think Justin called them. It was really for managing enterprise projects and initiatives. That really happened between 2007 and 2010. So in the 2010 to 2020 range, this is where we started to see the metamorphosis of what we're seeing in the market today. We started to see EPM become project portfolio management. So it became more about not just the enterprise, but really projects across any kind of a group or department or division. So EPM became PPM, renamed. We also started to see the first wave of Agile tools. And as the Agile Manifesto was put out there in the early 2000s, 2005 to 2010, people started to think about, what is this Agile thing? 2010 to about 2000, really to the present day, folks are starting to adopt Agile as a process, starting to see value in Agile along with Waterfall, or blend that together into more of a WAGIL kind of methodology where people use a blend of them. But we also started to see the emergence of Agile tools. This is where Jira by Atlassian came to market. Version 1 came out into the market as well. Rally came out in the market. And these tools were specifically focused, and Team Foundation Server by Microsoft, specifically focused on Agile practitioners and people in the Agile space. So, there wasn't a bleeding over yet into the project portfolio management space, but these Agile tools really emerged. We also started to see project portfolio management maturing, and there was a new concept that came into the market about 4 or 5 years ago of strategic portfolio management and strategic execution management at an executive level. This was less about projects and it was more about initiatives. So if you start looking at, you have projects you invest in, you have Agile work you invest in, you have service tickets and service management you invest in, kind of the grow, transform, and run life cycle that Ange talked about. How do I roll that up to more of an enterprise level and make business decisions about those beyond just projects? This started to emerge really over the past 5 years. And we also started to see some industry consolidation, firms buying other firms. So if we look at where all this went, there are some really, really important changes that are impacting where the market is today that happened over the last 5 or 6 years. The first of those, as I mentioned, and Ange mentioned it as well, Agile mainstreaming. We find Agile in 95% of the enterprises we work with today. It's a methodology they're adopting, or they've adopted in some way, and they've integrated in at least to their IT organization in some way. That definitely has a sea change in terms of how people work. Teams are organized differently. There's different roles, there's different training behind that, and there's potentially different metrics behind how you're going to actually track and manage Agile projects versus waterfall projects, all in one world. So this is something most organizations are wrestling with. The second major change we saw is the millennials entering the workforce about 2010 to 2015 had very, very different expectations in terms of what was important to them and the types of tools they like to use. And the move to millennials is the largest move into the workplace since the baby boomers. So it's a very, very large amount of people suddenly hitting the workforce with a different set of needs and a different way they work. And we always say they have, millennials have iPhone-like expectations of tools. It should light up, it should be easy, it should be drag and drop, and I shouldn't have to be a developer or an IT to use one of these tools. Those expectations have driven the emergence of many new tools in the market, which is really the third point here. We've seen the emergence of what we call work management tools. And these are different from project management tools. And there's kind of a blurring in this space that you should really start to draw some lines around. Work management tools are focused on what they call information workers, and also now blends into what we call occasional project managers. Think of these as people that are working, maybe they're in the business, they're working for finance, they're working for marketing or operations, and they need tools to organize their work, organize their tasks and activities. Sometimes they work on projects, sometimes they actually manage projects, even if they don't have a background in project management, and they need web-based tools or simple tools that follow that iPhone-like approach to doing their work. A lot of times these folks push back in the work management space and they look at tools like Asana, like Basecamp, like Monday.com or Smartsheet, and you'll see these tools have emerged in the market mainly to target that market for broader work management, where you also kind of do projects, but you don't need to have a PMP or a PMI certification to do that kind of project management, or so we believe. That has been a big change in the market that's really driving a lot of what's going on right now and what's happening with these tools. And finally, one of the biggest changes we've seen in this market is industry consolidation. We've seen small firms being bought by bigger firms, being bought by even bigger firms that may or may not have been in the PPM space. An example of that would be Clarity. They were initially Niku, turned into Clarity. Clarity was bought by Computer Associates. Computer Associates bought Rally, and then Broadcom, which is a hardware provider, actually bought Clarity and bought all of CA, including the Clarity tool set. So that's a pretty big consolidation of multiple tools all in one place. And then these new companies are trying to figure out what do I do with this? How do I position it in the market? PlanView is another good example. They went out and bought LeanKit for Agile. They bought Project Place, which was kind of a lower to middle end project management tool. And then they rolled all that up into their PlanView solutions. ChangePoint went out. They bought Daptive, which was kind of in that work and project management space. Now they have a tool set there. And then Oracle pretty much bought everybody that they wanted at the time. They bought ProSite to get into portfolio management. They bought Primavera to get into schedule and detailed enterprise schedule management in the engineering construction space. They bring all this together. So there's been a lot of industry consolidation that's changed. So those changes, if you look at kind of the history and the changes in the market over the last 5 or 10 years, really drive us to where we are today. So what does the market look like today? And if we look at Gartner Group, what they've done is, or Gartner as they're called, they've actually separated the space out. And this is really important if you're starting to think about, how do I support tools in my enterprise? How do I select the right tool? There are really 2 distinct spaces for project management related tools now. It's not just EPM or PPM. The first space that Gartner talks about is what's called adaptive project management and reporting. The second space, they've separated out the strategic end of this into what's called strategic portfolio management. Used to be called strategic execution management. So in that first space, we look at adaptive project management tools, and that is a really big bucket. So this is really designed, and these are from the Gartner report, to support multiple project and work management tools in an enterprise. They often have requirements to be different from strategic tools, which is important, but you still need the ability to monitor and make decisions on those activities, on those projects, and that work. So the idea here is that Gartner is seeing this move in the market, and we're starting to see it as well, separating out the work from the decision-making on the work. And what this also pushed for, as Gartner talked about, is the rejection of your traditional project management tools, as we talked about, moving more towards adopting adaptive project management and reporting tools with continuous delivery in mind. Continuous delivery focused more on Agile, right? We're not just waiting till the end of a project to deliver something, we're delivering iterations. And some projects may wait, some may be more iterative, but it's really the support of both methodologies in one place is what Gartner talks about. We also see, the emergence and what Gartner talked about of new vendors, as I mentioned, versus your traditional players in the market that are going to support different use cases. A Monday.com or a Smartsheet is a very different market than project portfolio management tools, and that's okay. So this comes from actually the 2020 Gartner market guide. On the right side, they separate this out. And this is where they talk about strategic portfolio management, that maturing strategy realization offices, or SROs, it's another 3-letter acronym, EPMOs, enterprise project management offices, and PMOs are quote unquote using technology supported strategy execution management as part of an integrated change enabled solution. And what that means is strategy is happening in one place, execution is happening in another. They're also saying that this market is continuing to evolve as things like scaled agile frameworks are safe, as digital product portfolio management, as mapping investments to different IT services and service delivery management is out there. These things are going to continue changing. But what we recommend to clients is, if you're thinking about tools, think in 2 different buckets. And if you're thinking about on the left, more of your planning and execution, think in terms of work management and think in terms of project portfolio management, because they may be different tools. So, the reality of this, how does this impact you in a PMO and an IT organization? First, there's a really, really good chance that you'll have multiple project and work management related tools in your environment, that you will be having to support a PPM tool like Ange and Justin talked about more for IT, but you may have other groups that are actually using other project management tools that are a better fit for their needs. And that's okay. That is actually becoming the norm. Really key, and on the top right, you'll see this, is developing some kind of an integration strategy for how you're going to manage all this in an environment is absolutely critical. And part of that is the fewer vendors you can go to, the better the better organized you can be, the less risk you're going to have. And that's why a lot of folks tend to look at the Microsoft platform and take a best of breed solution there, because it's really critical these things come together. We're also seeing down at the bottom, you may be involved from a PMO perspective in evaluating tools you never would have looked at before. That some of them may have really funny names. Monday.com, it's not a traditional project management name, or Asana or Basecamp, to support non-traditional project management. So when we talk about non-traditional project management, that may be something like marketing project management. We're getting a lot of demand for this and a lot of RFPs for marketing groups that actually have a very unique workflow, where they have to route documents and get documents reviewed and written up or marked up in a PDF format in an online system, and then route that for approvals. That's very different than a traditional project management system. It has a different set of requirements, different set of players with different expectations, and probably different metrics behind it as well. Another example is construction project management. Very large schedules that are often resource loaded with different material and cost resources that often requires detailed integration with a financial system. That requires more of an enterprise project portfolio management and scheduling solution versus one of these lighter weight tools. Or, if you're doing digital transformation strategy management, that's strategy execution management, that really projects are a byproduct of the work you're going to be delivering, but they may be agile, waterfall, a combination. It may be work being done. You need a way to aggregate that and make business decisions about that. So really, that digital transformation, as you hear as a big buzzword, is really driving a lot of this change. But this is why having that integration strategy is absolutely critical. And what we like to say is that with all this change always comes opportunity for the PMO. PMOs are not going to be marginalized for this. They're being given fancy new names like SROs, strategic realization offices by Gartner, and they're being elevated to the right level. If you can be more strategic while you're being tactical, you can show a lot of business value. So, while the tools are changing, that actually should not scare off the PMO, but it should leave us all with lots of opportunity here, that there's great chances in the marketplace for us to bring this together and tell a really good integration strategy. But, COVID hit. Everybody knows this happened about 14 months ago. And with all these changes in the market, COVID came in at a perfect storm time, if you think about it. And there are really some foundational changes of what's happened with COVID over the last 14 months that were driven by the coronavirus pandemic, that have really driven the move and the changes around these tools. The first of these is really, with everybody working remote, project management, work management, technology is becoming even more important than before. Justin talked about in his presentation, do I work from home or is work at home, or where are the lines blurring between work and home and all of that? What's happening in the reality is the culture is changing, our habits are changing, and we're adapting to a brand new environment. Not only when and how we work, but things as subtle as what we wear. Are we wearing, do we have to dress up on the top level when we're on a video call? How do we interact with people? How do I manage my kids when they're in school and they're coming up to me with questions? Well, I'm on a really important conference call and I'm working from home. This has all created a lot of change in the marketplace, different ways we work in a combined environment. And this is really driving a cultural change as much as anything else. The second bullet down is actually very, very important. And what we say is the battle between Microsoft Teams and Zoom is a really, really important sea change. What's happening is, as large enterprises are going to one or the other, and a lot of most large enterprises, because they're Microsoft centric, go to Microsoft Teams. Teams is becoming a modern operating system. What it's doing, and you saw Justin show it in his presentation, it's driving large enterprises to reconsider the applications they use to make sure it fits into a team's structure and infrastructure. That's really important, because now we start thinking about, if I choose an application, does it work with Teams? How's it going to work with Teams? How are my team members who use Teams 80% of their day going to interact with this versus just going into their PC and logging into an application? That's a big change, and that's a cultural and a technical change that is really driving a lot of CIOs and PMOs to rethink how they're going to choose these applications, how they're going to deliver them, and how users are going to interface with them. And we have clients now that are actually asking us to train their users on PPM through Teams, and that's becoming completely normal. The third one down is really important, and we're starting to see, and this is continuing, and it happens with every generational change and tech change, is really data sprawl. Data sprawl is becoming much more prevalent again. If you think about those of us who lived through the 90s, Lotus Notes. Everybody spun up a Lotus Notes site. They had collaboration, they had workflow, and before I know it, I had 2,000 or 3,000 Lotus Notes sites out there. How do I manage all that data sprawl? The same thing happened in the early to mid 2000s with SharePoint. I give everybody access to SharePoint team sites, and now I've got 2,000 of those around, and I need to move to the next version. How do I migrate all that customization? What it really becomes is data sprawl and data getting out of control because we're putting power in the hands of the users, and suddenly as an enterprise, we need to take that back, right? Or at least put some governance around that. And now we're seeing the same thing with Teams. Organizations had to roll out Teams like hospital systems in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks. Now it's out there and everybody goes into Teams every day and everybody kind of does what they want. But how do I provide governance around that and controls around that in a way where it's meaningful for the business, where I can capture the information I need? We have companies come to us every week saying, I'm in Teams, I'm managing projects. How do I move that over to Project Online or Project for the Web or one of the new solutions? Well, the problem is there's no structure around Teams, and a project management system in and of the nature has a structure. So the first step is cultural and getting people to agree on putting a process and a structure in place, then move over to the tools, then deploy through Teams as an example. We're really going to have to start thinking about getting our hands around that data sprawl. And finally, as we move from this environment of chaos, and that's really what COVID created, it created chaos in our entire society, really globally as much as anything else. More than ever, we're going to need better project management tools in both the areas, strategic and tactical, work management and project management, to make better business decisions. We're always going to need to know what projects are we working on, but also maybe asking the question, what work are people working on? And maybe we may have metrics around work. Yeah, people spend 80% of their time on these tasks, but 20% on projects. I don't necessarily need to know the 80% detail, but I want to know the 20% because that's where I'm showing value. And then I can maybe measure that in a way that's useful. How's my work performing? What are the critical resources? How do we plan and reallocate work and money? So COVID did change a lot in terms of what these tools can do and what they're designed to address. And from a Microsoft perspective, Microsoft does address both these spaces. The first one in the adaptive project management reporting, there's an entire platform here. If you look at the hub where Microsoft is going, and Chuck's going to talk a little bit about this in a little bit from Microsoft, really, where do I get all of my work and my tasks? There's going to be a concept of a task hub. Teams is going to be the central delivery mechanism or operating system for that. People are always going to use their email and Outlook, but in the center of that is going to be Planner and To Do, and it's still being worked out. But Microsoft has developed a framework called the Task Fabric. The idea that any task across any of your Microsoft-based systems or potentially other systems could all end up in that fabric, so you can see all your work in one place. That's a pretty big mission and a pretty big vision, but that's kind of where things are headed in the Microsoft world. Now, around the rim here, you see there are applications. We may be using SharePoint Online for collaboration. We're using Project and Project Online or Project for the Web for project portfolio management. We may be using Azure DevOps for DevOps and Agile tracking like Ange and Justin mentioned. But underlying it all is that Power BI capability to report off all of the projects and work-related information. Microsoft is still playing in the strategic portfolio management space, no matter what the analysts say. The majority of our clients, and Ange mentioned this a little bit, they're using the Project Online solution for portfolio optimization and selection, or at least they're kind of moving into that realm because they already have the projects, they already have portfolios. Why not use it to model out solutions? We're also seeing partner solutions by companies like Projility and other partners based on Project Online and the Power Platform to do that strategic portfolio management that Gartner talks about at the top level. So if you start thinking about it, there are solutions in the Microsoft space. In fact, it's really a platform that's going to help you get there and keep you in that world. Whether you're in Office 365, using Teams, using Project, the components are there to put the right solutions in place that will really be tailored to your organizational needs. Just some quick examples before we get into some question and answer. On the adaptive project management and reporting side, this is something that Microsoft does very, very well today. Gartner recognizes that as well, to do portfolio optimization and selection, project portfolio management, work management, whether using Planner, Project for the Web, Project Online, To Do, any of these components, they're all there. And then we can aggregate that information to get status and health like you saw from Justin and Ange. On the right side, as we look in strategic portfolio management, that's where we can use the portfolio analysis in PPM, but we can also use partner solutions or build solutions both on the Power Platform and SharePoint platform. So kind of the overall direction of the market really is separating these two out, picking the right tool for the job, integrating it together. And the reality is you might have multiple tools to address the same requirements. But really, in a Microsoft world, everything is headed in the direction of the Office 365 platform. Or you're using Power BI for analytics and trending and reporting. Power Apps provides an opportunity to build bespoke or specific applications to meet specific business needs for marketing or finance or operations project management, and maybe use the base project management tools or Project Online or Project for the Web for your IT or IT needs. So there's the ability to actually cater solutions to organizational needs. Power Automate, which can assist enterprises in pulling together data and information and business processes. Power Virtual Agents are a really, really cool concept. If you think about kind of going forward, think of a bot where a PM would go in and ask a question. I've run into a scheduling challenge, or I can't get a report out. A virtual agent could actually be smart enough to actually recommend where you go in the tool or push you towards a specific report. And project, as always on the right, is not going away. It serves as the core around project scheduling and work and resource management as it relates to project work. Down at the bottom, there's alignment on all this with a full stack of technologies that give you an opportunity to tailor your solutions to the needs of the business and the outcomes you're looking for. So this is really, when we think about the future of Microsoft, it's really about that platform. SharePoint Online isn't going away. Teams is going to be the hub. You can definitely leverage what you already have, but looking forward, these may be solutions as you start to pull together your overall strategy. And finally, before we jump into questions here, how do you start planning for this? How do you prepare for this new world and what's going on today? Control the chaos a little more. Here's some guidance for you. The first one in the top center, and Ange talked about this, focus on the business outcomes, the why, as Ange said in her presentation. What are the outcomes we're looking for? What kind of results from a business perspective are we looking for? Who do these changes impact? And then who is going to be involved in that process? If you can start with the why and the business outcomes, that can drive a lot of your decision making around the tools. We also ask you and tell you to keep an open mind. A lot of folks in your organization are going to be bringing you tools that do one or two things, and they may do those one or two things well that you can't do today in your enterprise with the traditional tools you have. Completely normal, completely okay. Analyze that. See if it's a good fit. If it's safe and you can deploy it, that's great. And see if you can actually replace that over time with a centralized solution that can be centrally managed in your organization. You also want to develop a set of requirements for the tools you map to, and it may seem blatantly obvious. Justin talked about this in his presentation about the pros and cons in order to make a really good decision and a selection, mapping that not only to the tool, map it to your culture, the technology stack, what's an easy lift for you to get to, what are people used to. So think about those requirements you have for the tools. The one in the middle down at the bottom, we say, don't do an agile selection process to select an agile tool. This is really, really important. We go into a lot of organizations where they gave the agile teams the ability to select their agile tool, and then you get agile sprawl, where you have Azure DevOps or Jira out there, and they've got 15 different ways they manage their projects. The problem with that is if you try to integrate that together into a single integrated strategy, there's no way to do that. I do PPM in one way, I do Agile in 5 ways, and I leave it up to the teams. That just doesn't fly. So make sure you have solid requirements and an alignment around what you want those Agile tools to do and how they're going to deliver. The one in orange is really important, and understanding security. This is always going to be important. If you're going to be looking at new solutions, have your team really partner with IT and dig into the security of those solutions you evaluate. We had a really big automaker that 7 years ago decided to go to a pure web-based solution, didn't do the homework on it, and then all their plans for the next 5 years of their cars was actually out on the web that hadn't been validated. IT had to take that back because it was so much risk to the business. And finally, show me the money. At the end of the day, users are really, really important. You want their feedback, but who's paying for the software? Who's paying for the solution? It's the company or it's the government agency. And that agency and that company, they really need to have the key hand in the key decision making and drive the decision on what tools to use. If you leave that purely to end users will always, unfortunately, think about themselves. They will not think about the broader enterprise. And the minute they decide to leave is the minute all that stuff walks out the door. And that's why you want to have a strategy around work and project management tools, strategic execution management tools, or portfolio tools, and bring all this together so you can plan appropriately and be prepared. So that is what we wanted to present today to give you a feeling for what's going on in the market today. Sarah, I guess we can hand it back to you. We can open the floor to questions.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your insight on project and portfolio management technology trends, Rob. So if anyone has any questions, please type them into the live event Q&A and I will read them aloud. So Rob, Marty wants to know if you attended the MS bus launch event for Project Tools. It doesn't seem like Microsoft has a clear direction on any of their approaches. Could you maybe give some insight?
Thanks for the question, Marty.
Yeah.
Well, things are changing, right? So you got to figure that the market is changing, and Microsoft is following that market. And Microsoft can't act as quickly as some of the bigger guys. They're doing their best actually, and they're working in much more agile cycles. So if you look at kind of the development of teams and those updates on a regular basis, on the project side, we're still seeing a little delineation between work management and project management, and that's kind of getting figured out. I think they're pretty clear on the PPM message. The project for the web, kind of that lighter touch project online, the web-based project management tools, that has emerged as that approach along with Teams and SharePoint. So I wouldn't say it's convoluted. I think it's developing as much as anything else. If you're looking for a turn it on, light it up, go today kind of solution, the marketplace has those solutions. The challenge is, just keeping that in an enterprise and making sure it's secure and safe, and it's going in a direction that has the investment behind it. So, we would kind of disagree on the convoluted side, Marty, but we do agree that there's still a working out of some of those strategies. So.
Thanks, Rob. If you have any other questions, please type them into the live event Q&A.
And I see Marty put a question there about the sausage being made and it's still in manufacturing mode. I mean, that's the reality with any software today. You may not want to see that, but if you go to any software package, they're doing updates on monthly and quarterly basis now. They're doing all that in more of a real-time approach. They're not doing annual and 3-year releases. So that's just the nature of how software is developed today. So understanding it's not always pretty, but that's just where things are.
Give it another 15 seconds or so. Okay. So for those of us in GCC, other tools become more attractive because they're available. Microsoft doesn't give us any insight into delivery times. Do they plan to improve that?
Good question. So actually, Jan Adams is going to be coming up speaking in about an hour. She covers the public sector, the federal government. Microsoft does have on its roadmap releasing functionality, the newer functionality in the government community cloud or the GCC. So that is in the plan and that is in the roadmap. So it is coming soon. We believe, based on the roadmap right now, depending on the validation process, it could happen later this year.
Great, and I think that answers our next question of, is there a timeline and when Microsoft expects for their tool set to be more baked, in quotations?
Baked is all a relative question. So it just depends on expectations. And I think what Microsoft is doing is they've always provided an application and a platform, and they understand that millions of people use that in different ways. So if you're looking for a very prescriptive solution that does this, this, and this, you may not find that. You may find more of an open solution that has components that can be pulled together to build a solution that you're looking for. Or you can go, turn on a project online and use a solution that has that functionality today. So I think they're just trying to think of kind of the new world of work and all these different permutations of it and come up with a set of solutions that are appropriate. Those will evolve, and they'll evolve as they evolve the tool, as partners like Projility and all the other Microsoft project partners come to market with very specific solutions. It's really going to be a combination of partner solutions and what Microsoft does on the platform side. So.
In our next session, Projility's Tim Horgan will be covering an overview and guidance on planning and deployment best practices for enterprise-level project-based solutions. Tim is a senior consultant at Projility with both domestic and national experience. He's a Microsoft certified professional and the technical editor of the Ultimate Study Guide for Microsoft Project 2019. He's had experience with Microsoft Project Professional versions 2010, 2013, 2016, 2019, and Project Online desktop experience. He also has experience with Project Online and Project Server 2010, 2013, 2016, and 2019. He's a project expert, to say the least. Tim, if you don't mind sharing, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks so much, Sarah. Let me go ahead and share my screen for you, and I will start going through my contact.
Awesome. All right, Tim, you're good to go.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Again, thanks everyone for allowing me this opportunity to speak with you all. As Sarah had mentioned, my name is Tim Horgan. I'm a senior consultant here at Projility, and what I'll be going through over here for the next 30 minutes or so is just some of the practical planning and deployment best practices. You know, as she had said, I have a lot of experience working with a lot of different clients, both internationally, domestically, from federal to state and local governments, higher education, and industry standards as well. So a lot of organizations go through the same process and still need to partake in some of the same activities from a planning and deployment and practices standpoint to make sure that they're accomplishing their goals and what they're originally setting out to do. So whether you're in bottle manufacturing, in airlines, or in higher education, or in the government, your goals are still somewhat aligned in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, but really it's about what can we do and what's the best way for us to do this, and you're still going to go through a lot of the same activities. So when we start to think about what it is that we're going to be doing, and what I've seen throughout my tenure in managing projects and deployments, it's really kind of, you can segment this out. And so if we talk about our goal of enabling a project and portfolio management system, you can break it down into a planning phase, an implementation phase, transition adoption, and then ongoing operations. And so what do we mean when we want to talk about and segment these out? Well, when we talk about the planning phase, we want to establish the why. You know, why are we doing this? Who's going to be involved in the project? And how and when are we going to do this? This is usually during that time frame when you're first coming up with the idea of, hey, we have a problem, or we want to know something better. How can we do this? What's involved? Why am I doing it? Then you move forward and you go towards an implementation stage or phase of the project. And this is when you're starting to roll out that project management software, right? In analysis and design, the building and validating, and then deploying it out. And then once that's done, what you need to then transition that to the people that are using the tool, doing that initial transition and initial training. Then maybe moving in data possibly. What data gets moved in? How does it get moved in? And so coming up with the best practices for identifying that and the process that you go through is really important. And then eventually, once you put all this work in through planning, implementation, transition, and we can't just let the system run by itself, there are ongoing operations that will need to be considered from a governance perspective, change management, ongoing and new user training. You know, all of those things need to be considered, and setting yourself up for success and knowing them in the initial stages and as you go through this is really important. So when we talk about the planning phase, we've come up with this idea, or someone's told me that, hey, we're going to be rolling out a PPM solution. Well, at the very core, we need to establish, why are we doing this? What is the main driver? Maybe this is your boss is telling you that we need to implement a PPM tool, but your goal should be, why do they want it? Why is that person wanting us to implement this? Understanding and that why will help you in driving a lot of your requirements and understanding what it is that your goal objective is. And that brings us to identifying meaningful business objectives. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. And then constituting what is success at the end of this project, or after this tool is rolled out, what are we going to define as a successful rollout of this project? Then we'll talk about who's involved, the stakeholders, establishing a core team. What does it mean to establish a core team? What's expected of them? how and when are we going to do this, right? Is this going to be kind of iterative? Are we going to manage it more in type of a waterfall standpoint? How are we going to roll this out to our organization? Is it going to be kind of a big bang proof of concept, or is it going to be piloted and then staged out after that? And we'll talk about the pros and cons to a little bit of both of those and why you would choose one versus the other. So when we talk about the why, when we talk about the what, in aligning our business objectives with application capabilities, I had mentioned earlier in the previous slide that what we want to do is establish the why we're doing this and establish those meaningful business objectives. It's not easy enough or simply enough to say that we want more visibility into our projects, or we want to understand what our resources are working on. Those aren't really that meaningful to the person who's working on the projects, but really taking the detail into it, right? If I just said, I want more visibility, well, anything in an application is more visibility if you can report on it. But what does that more visibility look like? So as from an example here on the left, you can see we've categorized some of these business objectives, and then we've really detailed them out. Provide and enable standardized scheduling capabilities, including bottoms-up WBS task structure planning and execution, task predecessor, successor dependencies, and assignment of named resources, right? That's giving you a lot more visibility, but it's really detailing out. Provide the ability to manage resource demand and availability, including capacity, forecast utilization, and actual utilization for both role-based and individual resources. All right, enable project managers to track baseline costs and currently planned costs for each TSS project. Right, that is really helping us drive, and if we can establish that type of level of a business objective of why we want to do this implementation, that's going to help us once we get to that analysis and design stage. Because if I know from a business objective that I want to do bottoms-up WBS task structure scheduling, well, that's going to have different application capability requirements, right? So then we take those business objectives that are detailed on the left, and that's going to translate to different application capabilities you see on the right: resource management, schedule management, financial management, right? The different tools offer such a high level of detail and capabilities that once you can identify your business objective, associate or relate it, translate it to an application capability, then you can talk about that specific application capability and really detail out the different requirements that are required. Right? If I just wanted to do standard task management, that's going to have a different level of requirement gathering than I would need for bottoms-up WBS with baseline costs and planned costs, and really starting to understand what it is we want to do, how does that relate to the tool we've selected and we're going to be using, and then being able to detail out those requirements. So now we need to understand what our business objectives are, but who's all involved in this project? Who's going to be the main participants in this? So when you think about it from the left-hand side, from an organizational standpoint, generally organizations have executives, they have PMO or some sort of project management office. Sometimes organizations don't. Different business units, this could be groups or departments. I've just labeled it business department, and it's here. And then IT as well. And so you can see executives, senior leadership providing oversight, and they drive that company vision and business objectives. The PMO, that's generally a group of individuals that are driving and maintaining those standards to ensure that the goals and objectives are met for those executives. Then you have different business units. Those are generally the groups, departments that make up the program's portfolio of projects that will be utilizing this new tool that you're implementing. So understanding that you're probably going to need people from these different units to be a part of this project. And then IT, obviously we need to know what our current infrastructure is like, what are our license requirements and needs, what about our security, who has access, who doesn't, and any software deployments from do our people have the right software? How do they get the necessary software? So those different organizational roles really will be a subset of the implementation roles. So what do I mean when I say an implementation role? It's really important, or what we found as a best practice, is to deliver this implementation or this rollout of a tool into a project. Have a start date, have an end goal finish date in mind, and then have specific people that are involved from a company standpoint or from an organizational standpoint. Generally, your executives are going to be someone who's a project sponsor, right? They provide that high level of project direction. They may review and give feedback and sign off on deliverables for those projects. And then having a main project manager or managers. I wouldn't go too far into having too many project managers, but someone who's driving kind of the day-to-day basis of this project, identifying and coordinating the functional and technical stakeholders, and they really help to facilitate that deliverable sign-off. Then you'll also have someone who's going to be the owner of that PPM system. So what are they doing from owning it, meaning in terms of the governance, making sure that they are responsible for the configuration and the change management. And then lead users. Generally, this is going to be maybe someone from each of the business units and the different roles that are going to use that, such as a project manager, a resource manager, a team, right? Having a lead user that is representative of those business units and within those different roles is really important. Why is that important? Well, it's very easy when doing your analysis and design to start focusing on, well, if only one business unit role or representative is in that meeting, they're going to focus on what's most important to them and their business unit. But that might not be important to business units B, C, and D. So from a implementation standpoint, we need to look at the configuration, the analysis, the design, and requirements as it relates across all the business units and not just specifically to one specific one. So we want to get a variety of viewpoints from those different users to make sure that we are getting all the necessary requirements so that it is as easy and provides as much detail for those users as they need. And then we additionally have those technical resources. Generally, that's going to be someone, from the IT side that can provide any input on needed information from IT to give, Active Directory, software, hardware, system setups. Now, that these users and these different roles for the implementation are going to have varying levels of use in the project. The sponsor is not going to spend as much time as the project manager or maybe the lead users will. Same with the technical resources. So different roles will have different allocations to the project, but ensuring that those roles and the people in them have the time dedicated to provide to the project. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we know why we're doing it. We know who's going to be a part of the project, but now how are we going to do it? When are we going to do this project? Well, there's different ways that you can, start to roll this project out. And that's, kind of taking on two different methodologies or viewpoints on it. You could roll out just a single group, right? Have all users go live at the same time. And the creation of that project data is really going to occur organically. Once that application is live, there's no need for like a systematic load of existing projects. That's one option that you can do. Another option is to have multiple groups, right? Training and loading of project data is organized into kind of a series of staggered batches. Why would you do that? So that users are trained, they load in project into the environment, and then another group is trained and loaded. It's really useful when a large amount of those existing projects need to be loaded to the application in a systematic manner. And how do you decide what gets loaded and what doesn't get loaded? Well, I can't tell you exactly how you decide that, but there's a lot of different options that you have. One of those options, right, is to pick a start date. All projects that are going to start after this implementation is done and completed is what will go into the environment. Or you could have a mindset of, well, any projects currently in the initial phase of the project in planning is going to be moved in. Anything that's currently in execution or in the closing phases of their projects, that's going to just see it through its project lifecycle outside of the tool. But we're going to move in those initial projects that have maybe just started so we can track them using our tool. That's a decision that you as an organization need to make. And then there's obviously different requirements that will need to take place in order to make that happen as you roll out the project. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about, we have our objectives, we have our team, we have how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. Now it's time to, hit the pavement and really get going. Well, we like to always say, let's deliver this as that project I said, right? Establish that start date, build out a project schedule for it. So that way you can identify when certain milestones will be hit, and you can break out that project into different stages as well. So you have this implementation phase that might then have analysis and design. What takes place in that? Well, that's when you're doing all your requirement sessions. So all we know right now is what we want to accomplish. Now we're going to talk about how does the tool that we've selected allow us to accomplish those goals, right? We start designing and doing the requirement sessions for those. Documentation is really big. From there, then we move on to building and validating, right? We get our requirements identified and we build and validate it. After it's built and validated, we can then deploy that into the environments that they need to, right? From a production, maybe a testing, and it's maybe a staging environment, depending on how many different environments you have. So those are kind of the different phases that we have. Let's talk a little bit about each of those and what's all involved in them. So we have analysis and design. When we're talking about the implementation of analysis and design, what's really important here? Well, it's really important to have an involved project team, making sure that our project team is involved. And sometimes you can get maybe too involved and there's too many hands in the cookie jar, which does tend to happen, and I've seen it. But having that involved project team where they are providing useful input, just let different requirements go or aren't providing enough feedback. Those are some of the common pitfalls that I've seen where if a decision is needed, feedback isn't given for 5, 6, 7 days, and that can really start to delay your project. So making sure your project team's involved and invested in the project. Then when we start talking about the requirements that we've gathered and are gathering, we can really look at prioritizing those. Maybe we have some that are higher priority but don't have as big an impact on what we're trying to achieve. Maybe we have some that are low priority and don't give us much. So maybe we don't want to focus on those right now. Maybe that's a future type phase requirement. Maybe we have some of those that are high priority and low impact. Maybe we really want to focus on those for this initial rollout or version 1, and then look into the next ones that are maybe a little bit more complex, or ones that aren't as high in the priority. Additionally, we have our people. Part of the requirements gathering is understanding our people and doing a real honest self-assessment. What we don't want to do is try and develop requirements that don't fit what our people can do, because do our people's skills match what we are asking of them to do? If I ask for my team members to be able to fill out timesheets and task updates on schedules that they're assigned to, but my project managers or my schedulers or my owners of projects don't track the projects at that level that's needed, that smells like a recipe for disaster, because the team members are going to get frustrated. The project managers will get frustrated because there's going to be different implications of the tool and how it works. That's going to get frustrating, and then eventually, inevitably, it would fail. So I always like to subscribe to the theory of kind of a crawl, walk, run, right? I can't expect my 9-month-old just to start walking around. He's still got to learn to crawl. And even before he crawls, he's learning to scoot around on his belly. So really starting to learn those best practices from a scheduling standpoint, and then build on those. And take this and really evolve and mature your processes to then be able to provide more and more data, right? Good data in gives you good data out. And then understanding your processes. When I talk processes, what are our business processes? Do we have a process for creating projects? Who's going to create the projects? Is that established right now, or do we need to define those? Really making sure that you have those defined prior to the rollout of the tool is important. Why is that important? Because it's really, really difficult and define requirements at the exact same time. It's going to delay that project. Or what you need to do is build in that time into your project schedule or that implementation of the tool to account for that, right? Real mind, a business process shift for saying that my processes need change, or do we need to develop them? And then eventually, if I have my people, I have my processes, and I know the requirements, who's going to own all this in the end, right? Is there going to be 1, 2, 3 project online administrators, as an example? Who's going to own the reporting? Who's on the IT side that owns the licensing and the software handling? Who's going to do all those things? It's important to at least start thinking about and identifying those people. Once we have them identified, then we can train them appropriately, make sure they're involved in the project. So we've gathered our requirements, we've done our self-assessment, we know which ones we want to do, now we need to build it. We need to validate that. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this, and that's to implement it for a waterfall type approach. There's pluses and minuses to both, right? You can build and validate, kind of like a agile type methodology. However, sometimes that can evolve into you're never really quite done. You're always doing something, right? So just some comment, maybe a possible pitfall there for you. Then maybe a waterfall. You have a build, you validate it, you update it, and then you have like a version 1, right? Then you can utilize a change management process and a change log to make up a version 1.1 or a version 2 and really just start to build that out. Again, involved project team that has been a part of this from day one. So they understand what was originally designed and anticipated to be done. And then we're going to validate it and we're going to update it. So they understand what should be done. So when they're looking at the tool, they can then make an honest assessment of where it's currently at. Now we've moved into deploying. We've designed it, we've built it. Now we got to move it out into our production instance, right? We have ownership. We should now define that. Those project online or tool administrators, right? Maybe they need to have that ownership of the environment. The IT side, who's the main point of contact there that's going to own the licensing? Who's the person to reach out to there? The reporting, who's in charge of the reporting? How does that get deployed? Involving and making sure someone's identified to do that. We also have the data, right? Who owns the different data there? What data is it, right? We have project schedules, we have resources, we have timesheets, we have documents, we have all this information that we can track about our given projects and provide information, but we need to know what data we're moving in, who's going to own it, and who's going to do it. All of those things are what take place kind of in that deploy, right? That's where we said, okay, or did we go with option 1 or option 2 where we did a single group or what did we decide on from what schedules, what resources, what timesheets, what documents are going to move in and what's going to stay behind. Some of that information is what goes into this deploy. So we can start to prepare that data for what needs to be moved in. And then our people. Do we have the people identified that need to be trained? What's the different groups or roles that they do, right? Project managers, resource managers, team members. What are they supposed to be doing in the tool? Do we have them all identified? Do they have the right licenses? Do they have the right roles associated to them, right? Then once we have the configuration deployed, now we can start to transition this into a real live and working environment. So when we do that, we have the initial transition and adoption of that tool, right? So it's been deployed, we have our data identified, and it's ready to move. We need to verify it, right? We advise the user the timesheets, financials, or dates for these, right? Okay, we know the data we're moving in, or we're not going to move any data in. Then we start talking about the initial training for these users, right? Maybe it's a project managers, having role-based training, really important there. I don't want to train my team members how to manage schedules because they don't need to know that. They just need to know how to update their tasks. Or I don't need to train my executives on how to open up a project schedule because they just want high-level details from a reporting standpoint. So making sure we have that executive training, role-based training identified. Something else to consider is delaying that training for those executives because what we'd like to do is make sure that that training shows data that's pertinent to them. If I do a training right away and there's no data in the tool, well, that doesn't provide much useful information for those executives. Their time is really more well spent making other decisions than looking at a training when there's no data. So let me show an environment with data, with good experience where they can get some hands-on activity. And then speaking of activities, what activities or expectations are expected from your users post-training, right? So if I'm telling my PMs, hey, you're now responsible for moving in your current active projects into Project Online, make that a part of your training on how to do that, and then set the expectation after the training. That's when we do our data move. Data's moved into Project Online or it's moved into our tool. We know who's going to do it, when they're going to do it, what they're moving in, and we establish that time frame for how long we think that that's going to take, right? And we give them, some dates and targets to hit. So then we can start to anticipate when we can do those trainings for the executive, when we can validate the reports that are working as anticipated with those projects, right? Then once that data is in, our users have been trained, we can then move in towards that ongoing operations. We have our governance. Do we have a governance process set up? Hopefully we do, or we need to start making some activities to establish those government processes. Who oversees the changes in the tool? Are there changes? Most likely there'll be changes as your processes mature, as you get feedback from those users. So having that governance process, establishing a change management process, right? A change log, who's responsible, who manages that, who then takes those changes that are approved and take place. Does that require current user training? How does that impact our users we need to make sure that they get trained on the new environment changes, whether that's just a PowerPoint deck or a brief that gets sent out. Maybe it's a 30-minute or an hour luncheon once every 2 weeks, right? How are we going to establish the updating of those users? And then how do we get feedback from those users? And then how does that affect our governance? And it's very cyclical, right? It's going to move around and around, again, ongoing operations. Now you'll see there at the bottom, you have a couple of different one-offs, such as onboarding a new user or ongoing training. Well, for onboarding, people come and go from organizations all the time. So who's responsible for onboarding someone into the environment? When do they do that? And how do those new users that get created, or the new project manager that comes on, how do they get trained? How do they understand what their expectations are and how to use the tool, right? Maybe that's part of the requirements on hiring someone, right? From when you're saying, well, I need to find someone with project management experience in tools A, B, and C, right? Something along those lines. So establishing guidelines for how to bring someone into the environment that wasn't originally a part of the organization when this was rolled out. Once you do all those items, now you're in a living and breathing operation that's utilizing a project management tool that then allows you to ideally provide some more insights and information to your users. And with that, I will conclude my portion of this, but will be very well to answer any questions for you during that Q&A section. Thanks so much, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks for the great presentation, Tim. So with that, we will open the floor to Q&A. So if anyone has any questions for Tim, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A chat box and I'll read them aloud. Give the audience another 20 seconds or so. Again, if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A chat box. Thank you.